Chapter 3 The Articles of the Constitution. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are going to be going over Article 1 of the Constitution, which is the legislative branch. When the framers of the Constitution were coming up with the Congress, they changed it from a unicameral to a bicameral legislature, much like Parliament in England. And we had the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, the main function of Congress is to create laws. That's their main function. But their other functions and powers that they have is to borrow money, to declare war, to raise a military, and, of course, for checks and balances on the other two branches of government. So Article 1 is broken up into many different clauses. And the next clause we'll talk about is the vesting clause. The vesting clause is what gave Congress the ability to make all laws. Now, the House of Representatives, which is found under Article 1, has 435 members. 18 of those come from Pennsylvania. They're elected for 2-year terms, and they can be elected for as long as they win the election. So you can find someone who's been in there for 30 years, who's won 15 different elections. Membership is based on state population. Pennsylvania currently has 12.8 million people, and you have to be at least 25 years of age. Now, this past election, we did have someone who was 25 win down in one of the Carolinas. Now, on the other side of Congress, you have the Senate. The Senate is made up of 2 senators from every state, so there's 100 total members. And you have to be at least 30 years of age to become a senator in our country, and you're elected for 6-year terms. However, so we don't have an influx of new senators coming in, what we do is we have 1/3 of our senators up for election every 2 years. Now, since there are 100 members of Congress, should there ever be a tie, 100 to 100, the person that breaks the tie is called the President pro tempore. He's nothing more than the Vice President of the United States. The next clause found in Article 1 is the 3/5 compromise, which we've already discussed. But the reason we mention it is because it deals with population counts, which takes us to the enumeration clause. And this is nothing more than a name for our census, which is done every 10 years, and it's been done since 1790, although in 2020 it has been held off a little bit. And basically, it's one representative per every 30,000 people in a state. So that's why the census is important. So we have equal representation. Currently, we have 330 million people in the United States, and 12.8 million of those come from Pennsylvania. Now, the spending clause of Article 1 states that Congress has the power to collect taxes on duties, imposts, and excises. And simply what this means, duties are our goods, imposts are our imports, and excises would be things like tobacco and alcohol, in which there's a tax placed on those, and we may never even know about those taxes because we're paying for something individually. Now, the Commerce Clause is a little bit interesting here because the North wanted a Commerce Clause in which Congress would have the ability to regulate all trade. But in order to do that, the North had to agree that, well, the South was going to keep slavery. So you have this whole little mix in here that the South wouldn't sign the Constitution without the North's approval. So the North gets the Commerce Clause. The South, in turn, gets to keep slavery for up to 20 years. The Coinage Clause of Article 1 allowed Congress the power to coin money. And of course, they would regulate the value of domestic and foreign weights as well, meaning that, your dollar here is worth maybe $1.19 in Canada and so on. They also fixed weights and measures so that the dollar would be our currency, and the only 2 types of coinage allowed would be that made of silver or gold. In the preamble, we mentioned the general welfare. Under Article 1, we have the General Welfare Clause, which basically protects a mother and infant, protects our nation's food, and promotes public health. Now, all of these came about at the same time. It really defined in the early 1900s when Theodore Roosevelt read a book by Upton Sinclair called The Jungle. And when he found out what was going on in some of these meatpacking plants, it changed the way we looked at nutrition and how we take care of ourselves. Article 1 also created the Postal Service, and the one good thing or effect that came out of creating this Postal Service is that it created roads that were necessary to deliver the mail. So what you saw was the United States making internal improvements based off of the Constitution. Now, Congress is the only branch that is allowed to declare war. The president can request that, but only Congress can declare war because think about it, you have 535 total members coming together who are going to make that decision for our country. In 1916 and in 1940, only one person dissented about going to World War I or World War II, and that was the very first female ever elected to Congress. Her name was Jeannette Rankin, and she opposed, because she was a pacifist, the United States going to war. One of the other things that Congress can do is something called the Necessary and Proper Clause. Basically, what this means is they can create any law that they feel is necessary and proper for the benefit of the American people. It's also known as the Elastic Clause because if it's not stated in the Constitution, then Congress does have that right to make a law that will affect all of us, and it's supposed to be for the good. So keep that in mind when you're going through this pandemic. Congress is allowed to make laws that would be beneficial and protect all of us. And of course, that would also fall under the General Welfare Act. Now, we mentioned the Commerce Clause. This is the other part of the article that commerce was dealt with, and that's the compromise here. And the compromise was slave trade would be allowed without interruption until 1808, so a 20-year period, except there would be no more than a $10 tax placed on every imported slave. So that was the agreement the North and the South finally came up with. In an effort to protect the integrity of the United States government and its officials, they passed the Emolument Clause, which basically says that you can't bribe us. All gifts that go to officials in our country have to be approved by Congress or they don't get to keep them. So even your President of the United States cannot keep any foreign gifts unless they are approved by Congress. And the last thing we'll say under Article 1, and there are a few more that I didn't go over, but this is the last one that's important, is habeas corpus. And this basically says that a person has to go in front of a judge to be charged with a crime, which is why if you're arrested, and hopefully you'll never be arrested, but if you get arrested, you will have to be arraigned immediately or you have to be released. Now, if you see here, and you can recognize that president in the picture, that's Abraham Lincoln, and he, during the Civil War, suspended habeas corpus and basically arrested whoever he thought was treasonous or being a traitor. Thank you. That's it for today. Until next time.